Just gonna chill out for a little bit, see if anyone wants to join in. Wish I had hot chocolate right now. It sounds really good. I saw a recipe for how to make your own marshmallows the other day and how to make your own graham crackers. And it just sounds like such a fun, cozy little snack. Cool. I'm just gonna wait a second or two more and then I'll get into my spiel. Right now I'm just cutting some threads off of something I'll show you in a second. Anyway, hi. My name is Sophia Munic. I use she and they pronouns. I'm one of the artists that's doing a remote artist residency with Laboratory. And hi, Alicia. Oh my gosh. A side note, I've never been a YouTuber in any form, so it's really funny like wearing that hat right now. Anyway, yeah, I'm really excited to be a part of this residency program. I think that like the remote residency format is really cool. I especially appreciate that Laboratory is able to still accommodate and support artists within the parameters of COVID wonkiness. So I'm just happy to be a part of it, and the other artists that are in residence with me right now, I'm just so excited to see their work. But yeah, I'm gonna talk a little bit about my studio space, try and give you a tour. It's I'm in a shared studio space, so my spot's a little small, but it's the perfect size. And then I will talk about my project a little bit, and then depending on where we're at for time, I'll probably just work a little and show you what that's like. So yeah, starting with my studio space, I am part of a shared studio space in Tacoma, Washington. The University of Washington Tacoma's downtown campus, and some of the buildings, they like rent out extra space. So there's like this whole floor is rented out to different artists. Not that many people have been coming in during COVID, so most of the time I'm here working on my own, or like there's another artist that works here. So it's nice to still have some space to myself to work. And I'm glad that it's still like COVID kosher, so to speak. And yeah, I'll show you my space a little bit. Most importantly, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a nice view of downtown Tacoma. I would say, especially since my apartment doesn't get the best light, it's really nice having a studio with windows. But then I have a few different sewing machines here. So as a soft sculptor, I do a lot of sewing. This is a Brother SE 625. So it's both a sewing machine and an embroidery machine. I got it pretty recently, so it's still kind of new to me, but I've really been enjoying learning how to use the embroidery machine, and I'm incorporating machine embroidery into my project. Before COVID, last year I was actually doing this kind of partial residency with the Pacific Science Center in their makerspace. They call it the Tinker Tank. So I was like a tinker in residence. But basically, like once a week, I would wake up at like 5 a.m. to take the bus to the Pacific Science Center to use the embroidery machine. So I feel really, really happy to have my own machine that I can use at my leisure that doesn't require quite the journey. And then you can see in this corner, you can see both of them. So this is the brother, and then over here is my Elma 6003, the quilter's dream. And that's the sewing machine that I learned how to sew on. My mom, it was passed down from my mom. When I was a kid, she taught me how to sew, but I never really created anything at all. I would just like sew extra quilt squares of hers together and make like mini pockets, but I wouldn't do anything with them. So it's nice to be advancing my sewing practice on the same machine. But this machine is really awesome. And since I've had it the longest, I put stickers on it, which is kind of fun. But it has a bunch of machine embroidery like stitches. I don't know if you can see them in detail, but there's like hearts and squiggles and also like different settings for like sewing buttonholes, zigzag stitches. So that was kind of how I first got interested in making patterns with thread. And then those are kind of like the main parts of my studio area, but I also have a couch where I kind of put all of my smaller works and the things that I need to photograph. And then I have like a pile of trash and a pile of scrap fabric that I use for stuffing. I have a salt lamp and some fun tchotchkes. And then there's a ladder, which is just in the building so that you can get to so that maintenance can get to the roof. I can't get to the roof. But sometimes it's fun to find the ladder for a quite literal different perspective. And yeah, it's kind of small. I mean, I also use this as storage for like my bicycle. But it's really nice to have this space, and I feel really lucky to have it. So that's my studio. For laboratory, I'm doing a second iteration of a project that I've done previously, called the I Am Here For You project. And it's where I made these like 3 separate objects that kind of acted to represent hugs. They're like 6-foot long noodles to like a tube of fabric, and then hands, and on them I embroidered the phrase "I'm here for you," and then I gave them to participants to film themselves interacting with them, answering different questions that I had prompted them, like, how are you being soft with yourself? How's your relationship to physical touch changed? How are you showing up for yourself and others differently due to COVID? And they kind of just acted as these virtual journal entries, where I could invite my friends to wiggle around with something that I've made as a way to reflect on those questions. The 3 of those videos can be viewed on my website or my Instagram, and they're each pretty different, which I think is really fun. And I did that project through the City of Tacoma's Public Art Reaching Community cohort, which was a really wonderful program that connected different artists in Tacoma. And I mean, initially it was supposed to be an in-person course, but once COVID hit, it kind of changed into a virtual class, and the projects were meant to be temporary public art pieces that examined the theme of long distance. So I think during this time in general is really interesting to think about what public art is, especially even before COVID. That's been like when, at least for me, when I think of public art or sculpture, that used to be something that focused a lot on monuments or big, large scale, permanent steel, heavy, hard materials. But it feels like more and more, both because of accessibility aspects of those materials and also accessibility of a permanent piece and the way our relationship to monuments are changing and how we're taking away monuments that really embody racism that doesn't need to be platformed through sculpture. I mean, that's not really like an expertise of mine, but that all is to say, like, I feel like there's been so much more importance on like temporary work and social practice as public art, and things that are more ephemeral materials, like using found objects or fabrics or even natural materials to sort of re-examine public art. And then within COVID, it's like, you know, people so often compare Instagram or social media platforms as like our public space. So it's interesting to think of that as the place to share public art. I mean, my thoughts are maybe not the most well verbalized within that, but it's just interesting to think of like how and where we're sharing our work right now, both in like what's safe to do and just like what's actually possible. So I hadn't really had a lot of experience doing video art before doing the I Am Here For You project. I think that kind of shows in the work, but I'm also okay with that. I like that they are true to my practice. So for laboratory, I'm doing another round and making 3 new objects, and then I'll be giving them to participants to film themselves with. But this time it's going to be called I'm Still Here For You, and I'm adding the still because we're still in this pandemic. Yeah, we're still here. But I'm really hoping / I'm curious to see how this far into COVID we are, like how that compares and contrasts to the first round of the way I did the project. Like, I think, for example, like early in COVID, like the first few weeks or months, I feel like it was a lot more commonplace for people to say, I miss food or going out or doing this or doing that. Like, oh my goodness, lockdown. But at least speaking from personal experience, for me, I feel like I'm missing those things so much more now. Like, I miss potluck so much. And I feel like that didn't really hit me until later in the game or further into this experience. So I'm kind of curious to see how that will show up for participants in this project. But so far, what I've been working on is prepping some fabric. So I picked out some colors, I washed all my fabric, I ironed it all out, and I've already started working on my first object. So right now I'm making an orange one, making some hands. These are it's inside out, and I need to cut this down and then flip it inside out and stuff it. But you can see that I've embroidered with my machine a teal heart with some of the scraps of my fabric and different tests. I might be making a small little book. So one thing I like to do in my practice is make little fabric or textile books as a way to sketch. So I think I'm going to make a little one. And another page that I've worked on is this is kind of like a drawing of what the object will be. Just cutting some thread. But yeah, I'm not entirely sure what the best way to show off what I'm doing would be, but also this is kind of the piece so far, so you can see how the machine embroidered words look. I'm in the middle of stuffing this, but I just don't want to do it right now. But right now I'm working on the hands. So you can see that I've sewn kind of the outline of my hand, and I'm just gonna cut off the extra seam allowance so that when I flip it inside out, it lays the way I want it to. Oh, Lucia asked, how did I find the colors for this project? And to be completely honest, the fabric store that I go to had this sale table that had like a lot of really nice solid colors that were 50% off. I just impulse bought a bunch of colors that I liked, and then I got accepted to this program, and I was like, I'll use the orange and the purple and the turquoise that I got because I think that looks nice. So maybe not the most thoughtful reason why, but for the first iteration of the project, I used a pink, a yellow, and a blue, and I feel like that round looked like a little softer, and I think that these colors are a little more energetic, and also machine embroidery looks a lot more official or just like crisper than the hand embroidered versions of these objects. So it's been kind of interesting. I'm not the best at like making multiples of things with sewing or replicating objects, so it'll be interesting. Like they feel like they're kind of cousins, if that makes sense. I think it's always interesting, or I have a hard time replicating objects, so I both am trying to keep the object the same while also allowing myself to see it as something new. I feel like I don't actually like the objects that much until people are dancing with them. And I think that's just because I'm still learning a lot about how to make soft sculpture. And normally, a big part of my process is kind of like experimenting or collaging. So a lot of times I'll like cut up a bunch of fabric or try out a bunch of things, and then that material will sit in my studio for months. And then suddenly I'll pick it up and it will become a new project. I don't entirely know what that says about me as an artist, but that's okay. I can show you an example. I really like working with scraps. But these are like two little things that I made for a public art display that I did last year that was hanging on a chain link fence in Edmonds. So within here, there's like blue tulle, this like weatherproofed yellow canvas that I found at Tinkertopia in Tacoma, Washington. Is like my favorite place to get materials. The darker blue is this like knee therapy tape that I had in high school that I would like put on my knee while I was running when I did cross country. And I just still had some. And then this spiral is like a really old sticker. So I'd kind of layer and sandwich all those things together and then like put clear vinyl on it and sew it shut, and then had a little eyelet, and then I could just zip tie them to a chain link fence. But with scrap fabric, once I deinstalled that, I kind of made them into these little blobs, and I think it's just shows that like I really like using and reusing materials and even past projects and having them evolve depending on where they're being displayed. With that, I think nothing ever really feels finished for me. But this project is kind of a little more concrete than that, so it's a little different. Maybe I'll show you some of the books that I've worked on too. This is one of the textile books that I was talking about. I'll just show it to you, but it's made just from scrap fabric that I have in the studio. And I really started making these as a way to bridge my sketchbook practice, which is very collage heavy, with my sculptural practice, which is very sewing heavy. So I started making these fun little toy-like kind of blobby alien friends. I'm really interested in creating objects that kind of think about what toys would look like if they were gender neutral, or if we were living in a world kind of like adjacent to Earth where gender wasn't really like a socialized part of our upbringing. I think that's kind of, it took me a really long time to put that into words. And sometimes I kind of think about starting like an Etsy or a small business where I sell gender neutral toys, but right now I just like focusing on learning how to make things. All right, I'm gonna start cutting stuff. I'm not the best at talking while working. Normally when I'm in the studio, I like to listen to audiobooks or podcasts. I guess I do talk on the phone a lot in the studio as well, so it just feels a little weird having like a one-way ramble. Right now I'm listening to the audiobook The Goldfinch, which I feel really late to the game on that one. I don't know how to talk about books without spoiling anything. Yeah, maybe I shouldn't talk about the book, but I do like it. I think that some parts of it were just like, there's this type of like monotonous depression that I think a lot of writers try to capture in length. And sometimes I just find that really tiring. So I'm glad that the part of the book I'm at now is more exciting. I do think it's a good book. I know that that's like maybe not the nicest thing to say. But yeah, anyway, back to the things I'm doing for laboratory. I'm hoping to finish up this piece in the next day or two. Normally I'm working on multiple pieces at once, but I'm trying to focus more on this piece so that I can get it done a bit more efficiently. In the corner, you can see a quilt that I'm working on. At first, I was really gung-ho and excited about it, but I've kind of been taking a break. I feel like that's the ultimate grandma quilter move, is to take a really long time. I don't know why I think that. I like how quilts are kind of having a resurgence right now, though. It's interesting to see like, I just think it's really interesting that like a fashion trend during COVID is that quilts are becoming coats. We're constantly at home, and I think it makes a lot of sense for like a blanket or a quilt to become a jacket. That just feels like the ultimate comfort, and that's something that I feel like we all kind of are trying to channel right now. These are going to be really hard to fold inside out because I made it so tiny. The hands never really look like human hands, even though I traced them from my hands. But I kind of like that. I like that they're kind of funky, kind of weird. I'll unfold that later. I don't want to get too frustrated in front of everyone. But now also the second one. Just gonna put some scraps away. Just gonna move my pins around really quickly. I always put my pins on the wrong side on accident. since this is an object that I'm having people interact with, I put in a lot of seams. The best advice I heard about sewing or quilting is that your quilt is only as strong as your seams are. So it's important to keep that in mind when you're sewing. I don't know if the goal is to see exactly what I'm doing. You can see some of the stickers. It's very precarious. So as I'm going, I'll do like a lot of backward stitches, and that's again to reinforce the object. I like having these really short pins. They're really nice for tight curves. This table bounces a lot. Sometimes it'll affect my thread tension. Actually, I tried putting my embroidery machine on this table, but it messed with the thread tension enough that I can't have it on this table. But this is fine for a straight stitch, as long as I go a little slower. If I'm sewing really fast, it'll bounce a lot. I think I'm learning that I'm not a YouTuber. Or that it's a new experience for me. Alright. I think while I have that going, I'm going to start up my embroidery machine so I can multitask a little bit. I can kind of show you how it works. I still feel like embroidery machines are complete magic. They're new to me. I definitely still have a lot to learn. The nice thing about this embroidery machine is that there's already a lot of patterns built in, so I'm mainly just trying to see what I can use that's already within the embroidery machine and make my own, kind of like collage my own different designs from there. But this year I'm hoping to learn how to make my own designs. There's different programming and software, which is definitely a learning curve for me, but it would be really cool to be able to make my own little embroidered things. Okay. So I'm just prepping the fabric to go into the hoop. This will be for my second piece. The nice thing about the embroidery machine is I can kind of multitask in the studio. Or at least try to. YouTube has so many tutorials on how to use embroidery machines. I won't even try to pretend that that's what I'm going to do, but if you're ever interested in it, there's a lot of resources out there. So I'm just deciding where I want it to go. The heart. Magic. Look at that. Pretty happy with how that turned out. want to put it. It's really annoying to rip out seams of embroidery machines because it's just so dense. So normally I don't embody the measure twice, cut once philosophy, but I'm working on it. Now that I have the embroidery I want in there, I will cut out the hearts and then sew them together. I'll probably wait to do that until I'm done with the orange piece, but just wanted to show you a little bit of the embroidery machine. I think I'm gonna try and focus and get a little more work done here. I also really excited. I just bought some kind of like zigzag shaped shears. So I'm gonna go pick those up. And I'm really excited. But yeah, thanks for kind of watching me ramble and checking everything out. I will talk to you all later.